ליאורה רוצה להתחיל?
חכה לגשמה.
שאת יכולה להתחיל ואחרי זה היא תצטרף, אז היא בדיוק תתחיל.
Hi Geshema.
Hi.
Hello everybody. Good to see you again. We hope that you're all well. Great to meet in these circumstances for another teaching. Thank you Geshema for these amazing teachings. I'd like to mention this week that if you wish, we have a course with Geshema this weekend, Friday and Saturday. The topic will be Buddha nature, and Galit will put on the chat the link for the course on Zoom, of course. And it starts at 10 a.m. So in Germany, 11 a.m. Very good hour for those who like to sleep late. And of course, a great course. So you're all welcome. And as usual, I want to encourage you to send questions to the lead. It's very, very helpful. So please don't be shy and feel free to ask any question. Thank you so much, Yeshima.
Okay. Thank you, Leora. All right, let's start as usual by letting go any disruptive thoughts and instead by focusing just on the breath. And then visualize in the space in front of you the embodiment of all good qualities that we can generate ourselves, appearing in the form of the Buddha. Seated in a cross-legged position and wearing the robes of a fully ordained monk. Who's inseparable from your spiritual master or your Lama. In order to be further inspired, visualize that the Buddha is surrounded all the great masters who followed his teachings and attained realizations. Those from India, in particular, of the Nalanda tradition, like Nagarjuna. And also the great lamas of Tibet, who preserve the teachings to this present day. And similarly, all the great masters of the Pali tradition and so forth, to visualize just their space in front of you, just feeling their presence, even if they don't clearly appear to your mind. And then to remind us why we're practicing the Dharma, visualize that we're surrounded by all sentient beings. Quietly sitting around us. Spread out in all directions. And experiencing endless problems, difficulties, anxiety, worry, and other sufferings. Desperately wanting to be happy, looking for happiness in the wrong places. And in that way, creating more suffering for themselves and others. And remember that they're just like us. On a conventional level, in that they just want to be happy and not suffer. And on an ultimate level, they're merely labeled. And then focusing on all these sentient beings, generate affectionate love for each one of them. Finding all of them endearing and lovable. with a sincere sense of affection, a feeling of closeness and acceptance of who they are. And this affectionate love then gives way to great compassion. Focusing on the countless sufferings that sentient beings experience and generating the sincere wish, may they all be free from whatever unwanted experience they have, as well as the causes for those experiences. And may I personally be able to help them overcome all their suffering, all their unwanted experiences, and their causes. Try to feel that aspiration from the depth of your heart. And your great compassion then, it grows stronger until it turns into the altruistic attitude or the determination to do whatever we can to help sentient beings overcome their suffering and its causes. Try to feel this with all your body and all your mind. And that strong determination then gives way to the mind of enlightenment. That aspires or is determined to become fully enlightened. In order to help sentient beings to overcome all their sufferings and its causes. And again, allow this mind to pervade your entire being. And also think that it is with this mind, with this motivation, that I will continue to study, entering into the middle way by Chandakirti. But I do this for the welfare of all sentient beings. And then without letting go of bodhicitta, let's recite the prayers. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Particularly focusing on the sentient beings surrounding us. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And directed at the merit field in front of us, the Buddha and so forth. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. All right. And then for this coming week, we could also think not just as part of our practice, but also a special offering to His Holiness, or we'll teach on the, I believe, 17th and 18th, actually, yeah, next week, Friday and Saturday, early in the morning. So an offering of our practice, making an extra effort once again this coming week, focusing on the mind of enlightenment, generating bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. And on top of that, of course, to deepen our meditation of the technique to generate bodhicitta, that is equalizing and exchanging self with others. And I mentioned it last time, I talked about it last time, the part where having equalized ourselves to a certain extent, as much as possible, so equalize in the sense, having understood the equal importance of other sentient beings. So not just myself being important for my own well-being and happiness, but other sentient beings are equally important, are equal in terms of their interests, are equal from the point of view of their ultimate nature. And so understanding that only regarding my own well-being, my own happiness to be most important, well, having understood that this is the root cause for all our trouble, we now exchange ourselves. So after a sense of equality, a sense of, well, having equalized ourselves with others, now we exchange. And I mentioned this last time. I kept emphasizing, well, don't think you really become the other person just because we do have this sense sometimes, oh, may I be someone else? Of course, motivated by a totally, by attachment, mainly by desire and attachment. So we would like to be someone else. Of course, we can't be someone else. It's unrealistic. So here it's not wishful thinking, but it's rather visualizing it in the same way as we may, well, do Tonglen practice, visualizing taking on the suffering of other sentient beings and giving our own happiness, which of course is unrealistic, but we still go through with it since it's so effective for our mind. So in a similar way here, we don't actually become the other person, but we visualize, we do, in the sense that, well, the other person now becomes the focus of what we work towards. So as we usually work for our own well-being, now when we meet someone else, we change that focus. So it's almost like they become me and I become them, and therefore now it's their happiness. And we can do this, of course, in the meditation where it's all sentient beings in a kind of abstract way, that they're just all sentient beings are me, and therefore they're the center of the universe. It's not me any longer, but all sentient beings are the center of the universe, and their well-being, that's what I'm concerned with. And of course, in our interaction on the daily basis, whenever we meet someone in our family, while at work, on the way to work, while shopping, whatever we do, of course, we meet other people, we interact with other people. And in that situation, also to spend that moment, of course, having familiarized with this during our meditation, it becomes so much easier than in those situations where we don't formally meditate. But to take that moment and to think, that person is me now. This is me. This is my focus. Their well-being is the center. And we may not really be able to do much for them. Of course, there are little kindnesses we can show them, but of course, we're not going to change their life right here and there. But the underlying aspiration is there to become enlightened for the benefit, for their benefit. May I become enlightened for their benefit. And so well, we still need to go through the other types of mind, that we need to develop great compassion and so forth. But just as that first step in that, we realize, well, I can make them the center of my universe. And of course, that'll immediately have an effect on our interaction with them. We talk to them, whatever they say to us, even if it's hurtful, it won't really hurt us, because their well-being, well, it will only worry us possibly, but the right motivation, it will worry us that they accumulate negativity, but it will not hurt us in the way it would ordinarily do with very strong self-grasping. Anyway, so that is the next step before we start developing affectionate love and so forth, before we focus more on those parts of the meditation. But here, what I'd like you to do with this coming week is to focus on this other past becomes now the center of your universe. And last time I put the mind, I focused more on the body. Remember, I talked about, forgot the name of those goggles. Remember later on, it's these virtual reality goggles. I talked about this experience, that the experiment that some, I guess, scientists, some scientists did in terms of familiarizing yourself with this body that you perceive as being your own body, which is possible. So the idea that we feel so strongly, we identify so strongly with this mind and body, but that's just due to familiarity. And anything we familiarize with can be defamiliarized, can be unlearned, if you like, and we can become familiar with, like I said earlier on, another person being the center of our universe, the center of, well, my, or in the case of yourself, your universe. And so with the body, to not think this is just my body and it's just my own body's well-being, that's most important, as we usually feel, but the body of the other person, but also the mind of the other person. So this week, it's also the mind of the other person, though you don't feel it, you don't experience it, but still, that is what's the center of your universe. So you're exchanging yourself, not just putting the other person's body as being most important, considering that to be most important, but also more important than your own physical well-being, but also the mind, their well-being being most important. So see whether you can work with that, whether there's a way you can practice this throughout this week. And of course, generate the mind of enlightenment, however fake it may feel at times, but also ask yourself how sincere this is. Just because it's a task you've been given, so you just do it, you go through the motions, or do you really sincerely feel it? So if there's a sense I'm just going through the motion because, well, that's what I'm determined to do, well, then try to generate an extra feeling, to really feel it. And however insincere it may be, because you just conjure it up and it's not coming naturally, but that's, again, we familiarize ourselves, making it more natural in that way. So try to be more sincere than you were in the past. Okay, great. So that's for this coming week. And then as for the material we'll go through today, well, there's very little left, few verses left before we come to the end of one major topic. As you remember, refuting the self. That's the last most important topic of the 6th chapter. There's more to come. It's called now, the next part of it's called the Enumeration of Emptiness, but it's really just taking now the emptiness that we've learned about and applying it to all sorts of other phenomena, which is really making it practical, or bringing it on the practice level in like bringing emptiness into like everyday life in every situation. Well, at least the phenomena mentioned here, but then of course we can further from there and become aware, like this action, this situation, all of them lack inherent existence. So that's the next part. But what I'd like to do before we move on to the next part, so today I've got a few questions, I answer them, and then we'll finish those last verses, and hopefully that'll fill today's class. And then for next time, I want to do a review of the entire topic, refuting the self. So starting with verse 120 up to 178. Now that's a lot. That's almost 60 verses. So depending on, I'm just going through each verse, just briefly, just say a sentence or two about every verse. So for you to, well, to bring it all together again, since we spent some verses more time, some less time, but probably forgotten parts of it, and just to bring it back, well, to your awareness, these different verses, what they talk about. If I won't finish, and I probably won't finish all 60 verses to go through them. I mean, 30 I can definitely do. 60 I'm not sure, so we may have to just divide it over 2 classes, but just to bring it all together again, and hopefully having discussed it in detail, well, this short summary will be sufficient for you to wrap up this material and get a sense of what refuting the self is all about. All right, but before we finish those last few verses, I want to answer the questions I received. The first question is from Yo-Yo, I guess I should pronounce it. So someone called Yo-Yo wrote a question or ask, yeah, it's a question. So the question is, can we possibly turn around materialistic assertion that mind is an emergent property of materiality and assert instead that materiality, that matter, is an emergent property of the mind? Can we turn this around? Well, from a Buddhist point of view, absolutely. We can totally turn this around. So in other words, her question is, the prevalent view nowadays, in particular in this materialistic world that we live in, if mind is at all asserted anyway. So in that world, usually the idea is that the mind is a property, is a result, you could say, emergent property or a result of matter. So to turn this view around and come to understand instead that matter is a result of the mind, that instead the external world as we perceive it individually is the result of our own mind in the past, but also our mind right now in the present. Can we turn this around? Surely, but it takes some getting used to. We were born and raised in a world that is very materialistic, more materialistic than, well, even in the recent past. I mean, I think historically we've never lived in such a materialistic kind of world, and that informs all our thoughts, our actions. It influences us in every way of life, and we're often not aware. It's very difficult to break this conditioning, and it's with Buddhist study and reflection and meditation that we can slowly defamiliarize with this idea of matter over mind that we all carry within us. So when we listen to the Dharma, there's a sense, oh yeah, it makes sense, mind over matter, or mind is an emergent property or is a result of, the matter, the environment is the result of our mind. It may make sense in that context, but the moment we leave Buddhist ideas behind, that is like, well, we're not following a lesson or we're not meditating. So especially initially, there's this difference definitely between the Dharma over there, that's when I do when I've got some free time, and then reality as I know it. So when we leave the Dharma behind and we do other things, we fall back into our old habits and reinforce the idea, well, the mind is just a result of matter. This is initially when we meet the Dharma. And that's why it's so important when we meet the Dharma that we make an effort to not be a hobby Buddhist. Whenever we feel good and we've got some free time, we do a little bit of Buddhism, but the rest of the time we live the normal life. And this is like a very common way of referring to it. I mean, I've often, as a nun, I'm often asked, well, you don't live in the normal life, as if there was the Buddhist life and the normal life. But of course, there really is no difference. It's just life. And it's a matter of bringing the Dharma into everything, your daily life into everything. And then if you really do that, since from a Buddhist point of view, matter is the result of the mind. You familiarize, you condition your mind, you become used to this idea that, yeah, I'm creating my future matter. The matter I will experience in the future. Because like when we talk about matter, there's a sense there's this external matter that everyone perceives. But of course, that's just a way of talking about conventional matter. In the end, there's the matter I perceive, there's the matter you perceive. And just because we give it the same name doesn't mean we see the same thing. We see something totally different. And in that way, conventionally, we refer to it as matter, as color and shape and smells and sounds and so forth. But really, we don't even have a way to prove that it's out there. Just because I agree when I touch it, there's something there, or another person says still, well, it's an experience of the mind. It's an experience of the mind. In the end, it's the mind experiencing it. And that's why I'm convinced it's objectively out there and everyone must experience the same thing. But we know, actually, it doesn't even make sense on the scientific level. It doesn't make sense. That even the colors and shapes as we perceive them, they don't exist the way they're light waves and so forth. They don't exist in that way at all. They're experienced by our mind in that way. And sounds in the way, in the end, it's pressure waves. So the sound as we experience it, it's not out there. So it's our mind basically creating this world, if you like, or this world around us being an emergent property of our mind. And then we realize, of course, the importance of the mind. How important is the mind? Because it all comes from my mind. So my experiences all come from my own mind. And the one thing I can learn to control, the only thing I can learn to control is my own mind. Nothing else I can learn to control. I mean, directly. Another person's mind, I certainly cannot. I may try to control another person, which really means control another person's mind, but it's obvious that we don't succeed. And maybe to a certain degree, but not all the way through. So the one thing I can really learn to control is my own mind. And based on that, we can therefore then change our world, our existence and so forth. But, well, it takes time. I mean, it's all about making Buddhism, bringing the ideas of Buddhism, and whether you're Buddhist or not, that's a whole different matter. But if these ideas make sense to you, the way it's explained how things exist, mind, matter, and so forth, well, if you believe this and you familiarize with these ideas and you bring this into your daily life, well, at some point, then you can actually change, you can turn around, as was your question here, you can turn around this view that matter, that materiality as a property, that mind is not a property of or emergent property of matter, of materiality, but the other way around. And that's, of course, like I said, is so important because then we take the necessary steps to change our mind. And in that way, work with our afflictive emotions and so forth, and not try to always change everything around us, things around us. I mean, we should, to some degree, try and make an effort, but also be patient with the limitations that we have. There are great limitations. There are no limitations to how we can change our mind. There's no limit. This is a very important principle in Buddhism. There's just no limit to what you can do with your own mind. That means, in the sense that love and compassion, you can generate love and compassion that are limitless. Limitless in that there's no limit to who you love and you cannot love. There's no limit to it. So it grows limitlessly in that your love will envelop, or your love will be active, or will be experienced for each and every living being. There's no limit to it. Your compassion is the same. So that's what happens when you develop your mind. And as I said, the only thing you can really develop. So it's really important. It's not just it's possible, it's important to turn around this assertion that Yo-Yo mentions here. But it takes time. It takes time because, like I said, we're really strongly conditioned in the way that I said previously, in this material world, based on, of course, scientific findings, but they're also changing much more. There's much more emphasis now on the importance of the mind. And if you just take karma, I mean, if you just take this simple fact, I mean, simple, it's like, of course, difficult to understand, but really put it to be put simply, the example of water, or the example of, like liquid being perceived by different beings differently. Well, they perceive, preta beings and celestial beings and human beings perceive things differently because they're born in a different realm. And that is the result, of course, of the mind. Where we're going to be reborn, where we're going to be in our next life, that is dependent on our mind right now. And even within the human realm, being born in a certain human existence, again, due to the karma we accumulated in the past, we'll be born with a certain body, with a certain mind, which then has very unique experiences. Of course, if you don't assert reincarnation, then things are a little harder to explain. But still, I think even without a footing in reincarnation, I can believe in reincarnation just on a daily basis. I mean, how I experience as pleasant or not pleasant, it all depends on my mind again. Whether the experiences I have, I can utilize, even negative experiences, utilize them to generate more love and compassion, to understand the suffering nature of phenomena. So even though it's a painful experience, possibly a physically painful experience, but I can mentally turn it around and turn it into a challenge, turn it into a cause to be more compassionate, and so forth. And in that way, even embrace it and not try to reject it. So again, the mind controls these experiences. We can learn to work with our mind to control these experiences, or at least turn them around to a certain degree. But anyway, I can go on and talk forever, because this is really all of Buddhist philosophy is directly or indirectly concerned with exactly that, understanding its mind over matter. Matter is an emergent property of the mind. So unfortunately, Yo-Yo, there's no quick answer I can give you, no satisfactory answer I can give you. It's really like study, reflect on, and meditate on Buddhism, and then I believe things turn around. Or you can turn around this assertion over time. All right, so that was one question. And then the second question, actually there are two. Doesn't say who asked the question, but it's someone writes, some people watch the recommended video about the numbers. I think it's called Do Numbers Exist? By Number Philo, or something. You can easily find it a few weeks ago, and asked me if you're going to expand about it. All right. Well, I wanted you to just fast watch it and not say much about it. I think I said a little bit about it, but not too much. And just for you to, for it to sink in and have your own thoughts about it. But you've had that opportunity now, a few weeks ago. And since we're almost at the part where we think or talk about the emptiness, not just of, mind and body and the self as, or chariots for that matter, or cars as we've done so far, but we could get to this point where we apply it to all other phenomena. I'll say a little bit about it, and it probably comes up again. As you remember, this video, or this short clip about this mathematician who talks about the three systems, possibly more, but I guess the most prevalent of those three systems, as to how numbers exist. What are numbers? And there are three systems that have developed. One is Platonism, one is nominalism, and one is fictionalism. And I'm not saying that those views are actually, one of them at least is presenting the Prasangika view. No, I'm not saying that. But there's one view that is much closer to the Prasangika, And there are two other views which seem to resemble or have there's a resemblance to the two extreme views of reification and of nihilism. So it seems to be like, that's even what the person, the speaker is saying, that the nominalism is like the middle way, or it's like the golden middle, if you like. And he himself personally would follow the view of nominalism. But anyway, the reason I brought it up was like numbers play such a huge part in our world. We may not be aware of it, but having lived together with, well, as part of my class, like Tibetan monks, many of them who'd arrived from Tibet and had received, many of them, a religious education as far as the Chinese government had allowed for them to do so, or to receive such an education. But many of them that hadn't received like a modern Western education. And so their mathematical skills were, some of them, of course, had gone to school the way, and their mathematical skills were equal to those in the West who'd received a similar education, but some of them had no mathematical skills. And it was really interesting to see how our life is determined so much by numbers, by time, by the date, and so forth, that numbers play such a huge part. Whereas in their case, it didn't play the same part. Then I became more conscious of it. So the question that arises, therefore, well, when we talk about the I and the body, inherent existence or not, the same question, of course, needs to arise when it comes to numbers. What are numbers? How do they exist? And so Platonism, the first kind of assertion of this, the first kind of view, it's quite interesting in that it reminds me also of some non-Buddhist philosophical Indian schools who talk about universals. When they say, for instance, this is not about numbers, but like, what is a chair or a table, or the cell, a car, and so forth, of all these objects around us. Well, they assert, the Vaisheshika, for instance, talks about these universals, like these universal, there's like a universal table. There's an absolute universal table, and therefore we can have certain instances of tables. We can have certain types of table, but there's this tableness, if you like. So their philosophy talks about these universals, and Platonism seems to be saying something similar. Like, what are numbers? Numbers, according to the Platonistic view, numbers exist as abstracts and independent of time and space. And so the thing is, like, where's this view coming from? I can totally I can understand where this is coming from, because we don't see numbers the way we see trees and cars and so forth, unless someone writes the symbols of numbers, of course, on number plates and so forth, and we see them all around. But numbers seem to be not to be around us when you walk into a forest and so forth. There are no numbers visible in the same way as we see flowers and trees. And it seems to be something, of course, definitely more abstract, something very abstract. And so the idea that it's not out in nature, it's nothing concrete, so it exists, it definitely exists. So since it's not something we perceive in space, basically, like we perceive other concrete things around us, like nature, well, they must exist beyond space and time, right? And then you can use them, you kind of take them from that sphere where they exist beyond time and space, and you can use them now to count objects around you, and explain things and have scientific understandings based on mathematics, since all science is really based on like physics and chemistry and so forth. Well, especially physics are based on mathematics, so therefore they're taken from this abstract plane and now utilized. So it makes sense, this way of thinking. I get where that comes from. That's the first view. And then there's nominalism. Nominalism, where the view is, well, numbers don't exist on such a plane, beyond time and space. No, numbers, and here I'm using a little bit the Buddhist terminology, they're really labeled on the basis of the objects we count. The person in the video doesn't say that, but I guess you're saying really like the way we teach a child mathematics. So if you say there's one chair, there's a second chair, there's 3 chairs, and if you add another chair, then you have 4 chairs and so forth. So based on the objects around us, then we utilize numbers. They're not existing outside of time and space. He says, anyway, what does that mean? He's quite rightly saying, what does that mean? It exists beyond time and space. But anyway, that's Platonism, and we've moved on to nominalism. So, well, it's really, that seems pretty much the idea of numbers are labeled on the basis of the objects around us. And lastly, there's fictionalism. And fictionalism is, well, there are no numbers. And again, I get that. And of course, from what I said, well, I'll go back to nominalism because that's really reflecting the Buddhist view. But fictionalism is this idea, well, since these things, there are no numbers around us, we just came up with them. I mean, it doesn't seem we're born with this idea of numbers. I mean, children are not born, the first thing they do is count, I don't know, the things around us. So it doesn't seem that children are doing that. They have to learn mathematics. So it's not something we're born with. So it seems something was just made up, and it actually doesn't exist. So fictionalism, we utilize it, it's effective. I think he also uses the example, he says, well, what it says in the Bible, assuming that some of the ideas in the Bible don't exist, like there's no creator God and so forth. Well, it's very effective, it's proven effective, but actually these ideas, they're just made up. So numbers are made up in a similar way. So that's how he explains those 3. And they all make sense to me. I mean, in the sense that I don't follow them, but the first and the last, Platonism and fictionalism, makes sense to me in that I understand where people are coming from, that I guess I have a sense why they're asserting what they're asserting. And nominalism, that is the view, that's the view, I guess Chandrakirti would follow if he was given a choice. In that, yes, numbers are really just labeled. Again, we label them, the human mind is such as the capacity to utilize numbers, the way we do it, take them to an abstract level, which we can do. But in actuality, when we say 1 and 2 and 3, I mean, they're just labeled on the basis of something there. But we can take them out of this, just as we can talk about table in general without referring to a specific table, although there's no universal table. But we can talk of table as like in an abstract way. We can do the same with numbers. So that's how I've understood it. And then he says that one of the problems with that is that if we say there's always a reference object out there, like there's this concrete world out there, and we use numbers to refer to it. Well, here I would disagree. There's no concrete world. There's just a merely labeled world. But that's where the difference lies between the Buddhist view and the view of nominalism as presented by him. But just besides that, so he says that there's this concrete world out there, it's so concrete, but certain numbers are not concrete. So pi is one example. Pi it's not concrete at all. It's 3.141, and then it goes, I think that's what it is, but it goes on endlessly. And you don't even need to mention pi, just divide, divide certain numbers and you end up with like 3.333. I don't remember. Anyway, so you have like these numbers like endlessly continue on, or you have the square root of -1, and again you can't posit it. So where's all that concreteness? He's basically saying around us this world is so concrete, and then numbers, they certain numbers fail to provide that concreteness. And of course, from a Buddhist point of view, it's like saying, well, concrete? Are you kidding me? There's nothing concrete. It seems concrete, right? Like a car, you look at a car, very concrete. But when you look at it just from a subatomic level, these atoms, there's nothing concrete about a car. They're just these atoms racing around. And the car, it's made up of space mainly, because all these atoms are mainly made of space, and they're never in the same place, and they're moving around, and then even on a subtler level there's just energy and so forth. So this concreteness is just an illusion. And endless, well, matter has existed since beginningless time and will continue to exist, so it goes on endlessly. So endless is all around us. endless is there, so no problem with endless numbers. And there's certain things you just cannot posit a permanent mind, right? So the square root of -1, yeah, I cannot be posited. Just you cannot posit permanent exists. Permanent exists. The mind exists, but you cannot posit a permanent mind. So just as the square root of -1 cannot be. So quite similar, quite similar. So there's no problem with that. Pi is not a problem. Well, the endlessness of numbers, you can count both ways. Minus, you can go endlessly, -1, -2, -3, and so forth. You can go the other way, endless, right? And that's the same for the world. Mind and body, mind and matter have existed since beginning this time and will continue to do so. So I believe nominalism works best. Although the way he presents it, like he just kind of briefly says in that video, like this concrete world out there, like I said, with that, I would disagree. All right. So I hope I've expanded on that to a certain degree, enough that it makes sense what I was trying to say. The reason for you, I wanted for you to see the video, maybe watch it again. And if you have further question, you're welcome to ask. Now I have one last question from Jimmy. And his question is, we say everything is merely labeled. Okay, is there any connection between mental labeling and counting? Interesting. Mental labeling and counting. Wouldn't counting be the same as labeling, he says? So here, of course, depends on what you mean with counting. But then he says, when we count, we label this one, this one, this one. When we label, we also count this one, that one. All right, so first of all, what is labeling? Labeling is really just the thought, it is such and such, all right? So in any given situation, just think you're in a situation, you have certain experiences, and our mind tries to make sense of it and has thoughts. This is a person, there's someone else coming. So when you do mindfulness meditation and you're used to introspection, like this introspective kind of awareness, you become aware how there's this constant narrator. Like in every situation, there's the mind going, it's this, it's this, it's this. It's kind of narrating the situation. It's labeling the situation. So there's a person, this is my friend. Oh, he's saying such and such. He's really abusive. He's abusing me. He's personally hurting me. This is no longer my friend. This is now my enemy, right? Our mind just whatever was, I labeled this person my friend on the basis of our past, our history together. And now because of what just happened, and it sometimes doesn't need much, a few words, and this person becomes my enemy. 20 years of friendship and it's gone. Now I label enemy, right? Okay, so now enemy. So it's my mind in each moment. Oh, it's this, it's this, it's this. So it's a very complicated process. I mean, complicated in that it happens so rapidly. It happens all the time. And we keep, our labeling changes. Like I said, my best friend is now my worst enemy from after a few words. So sometimes things remain the same. The friend is still a friend and so forth. But in each situation, our thoughts continuously create this world. So really thoughts create reality, in that thoughts label. And labeling is that which creates reality. So experiences are labeled as shape and color and sound and beautiful sound and not beautiful sound and music and blah, right? And so all the experiences we have, we judge them. We say it's this and it's this. And like just 1 minute of thoughts. If you could just write down 1 minute of thoughts you had, so much labeling taking place. Right? It's this, it's that, it's this. This, he said this. He's a good person. He's not a good person. He's ugly. He's still, right? And so forth. We can. I mean, I can literally. It's amazing. I remember teaching a class in McLeodganj, and it was the monsoon, and I was looking out of the window. It was raining, and I was teaching a class, thinking what I was going to say next, and thinking at the same time, I hope I took with my laundry. Right? I was talking to everyone. I was watching them as they were falling asleep or maybe not fall asleep, be attentive and what have you. And at the same time, well, remembering that I left my laundry out. So it was all happening Not at the same time. It was definitely happening rapidly one after the other, but it was so quick. And we all like that. I mean, there's no multitasking as such, as really just we jump very quickly from one thing to the next. And each thought is labeling. It's not like actively thinking, oh, I'm going to call this person my friend. Like, we talk of labeling usually in that way, where we actively decide to call this such and such. Well, that's also called labeling. Yes, as a child, someone shows you it's a table and repeats the word table over and over. And at some point you understand that's a table. I'll call this a table. Next time I want my mom to put this closer to me, I say, give me the or move the table or what have you. That is a very coarse version. That's not what we mean. We mean thinking in each moment. So that's what we do. That's what we mean with labeling. And so in that way, what I perceive as reality is really the result of all these thoughts I have, right? Okay, so counting, calling that counting, I think counting is a part of labeling. It is a type of labeling. So he's not, as Jimmy puts it here, he's not saying counting 1, 2, 3, but this one, that one. Yeah, in that way, if you call that counting and you go through a situation, then this, then that, then this, yeah, you could describe it as a type of counting. So I'm not sure that every labeling is a type of counting, but every counting is definitely a type of labeling, I would say, right? But interesting idea that he puts forth. Would our minds subconsciously count some regular thoughts, mental events, and in turn, this gives us the impression of time? I wonder, he says. Yeah, that's interesting. Our sense of time when lots of events have passed. Yes, actually, that's true. I mean, like our sense of time is very much determined by what we experience. I mean, I think you've all had that experience. If you go through a week during which a lot of stuff happens, a lot of that. So there's like a sense that was a long week because there's so much stuff happening. Whereas if every day is the same, there's like nothing happened. Like, how did this week pass by so quickly? Well, we also have a sense that it passes quickly, I guess, also in terms of when a lot happens, but it's still a different feeling. So our sense of time is different. Like if you're imprisoned, let's say, for 10 years and every day is exactly the same, there's a very different sense of time versus you travel the world and every night you're in a different town, right? Because the thoughts are different. All right. I mean, in terms of thoughts created as a result of the external environment, of course, if you have all sorts of crazy thoughts while you're in prison and no one's different, then again, your sense of time will be different. But I would agree with Jimmy, what he says. And also, he says, does our mind maybe subconsciously count the distinct features of our environment? And this gives us the impression of space and objects in time. Well, it definitely labels, whether you call it counting, but it labels space and objects in time. It seems to be there's this objective space and objects in time, but of course it's actually just labeled. I agree with him. Yeah, it's merely labeled. It's not like there's an objective space and time, but it's our mind labeling it. We still talk of a conventional, therefore, space and time, but it's still merely labeled. This way we can draw some definite connection, he says, between mental labeling and the counting of numbers. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's an interesting way of thinking. Oh, he has a second question, I just realized. Yes, so there is a second question. So he says that I usually say I'm labeled on my mind, on my body and my mind. He says this is confusing because why should I be labeled on something that is mine anyway? He's got a point there. I'm labeled on my body and mind. I should not say that. I should really say I'm labeled on body and mind, on this body and this mind. And I labeled it as I on the basis of this mind and body. I label I. And once I've done that, once I've labeled I on the basis, then they become mine, right? Conventionally. Okay. So here, why I should label something that is mine anyway? Yeah, well, of course, it's only mine if it's labeled. Like the idea that whatever exists as car, house, and so forth is only a car and a house and so forth if it's labeled. So mine is only mine if it's labeled. There's only an I if it's labeled. So without labeling, and I'm not saying I have to be the one labeling a car for a car to exist. No, for me, there's my perception of the world. And unless I label something a car, and it doesn't need to be with the word car. I may not know the car, I may have another symbol for car, but there must be the thought car, even if it's not expressed by a language. And of course, I think we all know we can have thoughts where we don't use language. Maybe we use picture imagery, like we have utilized, of course, generic images, but those may be sounds, or they like the words that we usually use, like we think in a certain language, or if we don't know the name of this object, we don't know how to refer to it, we use another word to refer to it, or we use no language. We think without language, but with maybe visual imagery or whatever. Anyway, therefore, for me to think of myself as I need to label I need to have the thought I. So therefore, once that's done, then I can think of mine. All right. So why should I be labeled on something that is mine anyway? So he's kind of saying, he's like, if I label for the first time on the basis which is mine, well, no, actually first I need to label for this I to become mine. And it's similar. Sonnes the Dalai Lama often gives this example, how our attachment works. The different types of attachment. He talks about like walking into a store and seeing something you really like, and there's a type of attachment there. There's a type of desire. I want this. But that is different to once you've bought it and you've made it yours. Once you've bought it and you're taking it home, now and then there's the thought, this is mine. It's a different thought. So initially it wasn't yours. You wanted it and you craved it, right? But before you bought it, you paid for it and you could take it home. This thought, this is mine, didn't arise. And now it's mine. And so this process needs to take place on a mental level. It's mine. This thought needs to arise, and whether it's conscious or not. But without that, conventionally, it's not. Well, and someone, at least there's some labeling taking place. There's no reason to say it's mine. All right. Anyway, of course, based on a certain basis of labeling, basis of imputation, that's of course important, based on a mind doing so, etc. You need all this, and then you can say, well, it's mine, it's I. Therefore, it'd be better to say, I label the I on this mind and body. I mean, it's still okay to say my body and mind, of course, but I get his point. He says, I've come across the term appropriated aggregates. Doesn't that mean, anyway, that should do, because otherwise I won't finish those verses. I just realized I've spent too much time on the questions. I'll get back to it next time. So this first part of his question, I think I've answered. All right, let's please go back. It's not much left, but I definitely want to finish this before we continue next time with the summary. We got to verse 173, we did 175. We finished 175, I believe, where the argument here in this context, as you may remember, first Chandrakirti, a few verses before that, argues if the other person, the opponent, whoever the opponent is, Svatantrika, follower of the Satantrika school, or any other opponent believing in inherent existence, holding on to inherent existence, and at the same time talking of cause and effect, well, if cause and effect exist inherently and as concrete as they therefore have to exist, then there's only two possibilities: either cause and effect meet or they don't meet. They have contact, they meet. So if they meet, there's no other way but then them becoming one. And if they don't meet, well, then they're totally separate. There's no connection between them. And why would you talk of one being the cause of the other? Now, having had all this discussion, then the opponent is saying, well, with what you just threw at me, your argument, I throw the same argument at you. With your view of how phenomena really exist, I can ask the same question. I can ask you, well, what about cause and effect? Do they meet or not? Or more specifically, what he says is your refutation, so the refutation that you just presented, it refutes a certain view, which is the view of the opponent. So those two, the refutation, that refutation and that which is being refuted, do they meet or not? I can ask you the same question. And just as I cannot answer this question on the basis of my view, you cannot do either. Okay, so valid argument. So the other person, the opponent is saying, the argument that you use to refute me is a rebounding argument, because the same argument destroys your own view. So it destroys the argument you present in order to destroy my view, in order for me to understand that my view is wrong. Well, I can throw at you the same view and it will destroy your view. It will get you to understand that your view is wrong. And Chandakirti, or, well, the Prasangika, well, represented by Chandakirti here, well, he's saying that's not taking place because I don't believe in this concrete world as phenomena existing inherently as cause and effect, as refutation, and that which is refuted as something very concrete. If they were that concrete, as in like intrinsically in and of themselves a refutation, and intrinsically in and of themselves that which is being refuted, since I don't believe in that, and since I don't hold on to that, there doesn't have to be this concrete, either they meet or they don't. No, it doesn't need to be. Both exist conventionally as being merely labeled. And so he uses here in verse 174 and 175, he's using the analogy of a reflection, whether you use the reflection of the sun at the time of the eclipse of the sun. You don't look at the sun itself, you look at a body of water, and you see it's not the actual sun. It appears to be the actual sun, but it isn't. And still you can come to understand the characteristics of the sun in that moment. So similarly, he says that we don't believe things exist inherently. They appear that way, but they don't exist that way. And still we can talk about them. We can refer to them as having this characteristic and that characteristic. So conventionally they exist and they function. Similarly, he uses the example of the mirror image in the face in the mirror. Again, when you see this mirror image, it's not the actual face. So as an analogy to show that phenomena don't exist inherently, but still through this mirror image, I have the power to cleanse my face. So it appears to be an actual face while it isn't. And still, although it doesn't exist the way it appears, it helps me to cleanse my face. So similarly here, there's a non-inherently existent wisdom, there's non-inherently existent reasoning, and I can use that to enhance this wisdom. I can cleanse my mind of all the negative views in the same way as I could do this with the reflection in a mirror. And in the same way as this reflection is not the actual face, well, the reasoning I apply, all the different techniques that I utilize to cleanse my mind of ignorance, they don't exist inherently, don't exist the way they appear, and still they work, they function. And none of those extremes arises in my own case. So that's what he says in verse 175. This is how far we got. Then 176, he explains more clearly why these consequences as presented to the opponent, I mean, all these faults that are presented, they do not equally apply to the Prasangika school. He says, if our proof inferring the thesis possessed real existence, so if the proof, the refutation, the proof we presented inferring a certain thesis possessed real existence, and if the thesis being proved had real existence as well, then the arguments about contact and so on could apply. Then if they existed solidly as you assert them to be, then we would have to say, does that which is refuted, the reasoning, does it meet with that which is being, does the refutation meet with that which is being, and so forth, but it's merely labeled. There's no meeting as such. Since this is not the case, you're only frustrating yourself. You're just trying to apply reasoning to refute our own view of phenomena being merely labeled and so forth, and you're just tiring yourself. I mean, it's not working. This is not working. These extremes do not arise because our view is not one that is extreme. And then he goes on to say 177, it is easy for us. Yeah, so he's just saying that it's the lack of intrinsic existence. The heading is the lack of intrinsic existence, or that lack of intrinsic existence as asserted by the Prasangika can be established. It can be actually relatively easy be established. It can be proven, but the opposite cannot be. So as you apply reasoning that establishes the lack of inherent existence, they make sense. They're difficult, but they do make sense. Whereas if you try to establish the opposite, it's really tiresome because you're trying to prove something that's actually impossible. And so this is set forth in this verse 170, saying it is easy, relatively easy, I should say, for us Prasangika, to make others realize that all things lack real existence. So the things around us, they support us in that. But you opponent who asserts inherent existence, cannot easily make others apprehend intrinsic existence. Okay, we ordinarily take it on, we're so used to it. But when you really apply reasoning, it's like, what is the relation between things? If they exist inherently, why do they interact if they exist in and of themselves? That interaction, cause and effect, if you really think about it, it no longer makes sense. It becomes harder and harder to really on a subtler level or on a deeper level to establish. And what is just simply, where's the car in the car, right? I mean, we get stuck simply in that. If you insist there's this inherent car, well, show me that car that can be found. Okay, so why ensnare the world in the web of flawed logic? He's basically saying it's so tiresome. Even just wait is this? Yeah. So basically, he's arguing here also like the examples that are used, by the Prasangika, they're also asserted. The examples like mirror images and so forth, they're also used by the other philosophers, like the Buddhist philosophers, they're also used, and they're all accepted. However, so in that way, the same examples being used, that of a mirror image, that of a mirage, and so forth. So the other Buddhist philosophers, they all assert to a certain degree that there's something that exists. They don't assert that phenomena exist in lack inherent existence, but this idea that things don't exist exactly the way they appear to us. So, for instance, this world seems to be full of lasting happiness. They understand that that's not true. Phenomena appear to be permanent. Again, they understand, the other Buddhist philosophers understand that not to be true. So they're already moving in that direction, using these examples that show that phenomena, that show that something can appear one way but exist in a different way. And so Chandrakirti is basically saying, these examples, they support our view. You have no examples, like real examples, that prove that phenomena exist inherently, but we have plenty of examples that prove, and analogies and examples that you accept, that prove that phenomena don't exist in and of themselves. So that's what he's basically arguing. And then 178, yes, 178, let me just see, that's the last verse as part of this particular section on refuting the self. Understand other remaining refutations from what has been said above. So we have these main refutations. What were the main refutations? The remaining ones are the ones we just went through, the ones about contact, cause and effect. They're like more peripheral. I mean, they're not like the main refutations that you usually see. Usually it's about the 7 extremes, one different, how does a chariot exist? What makes it a chariot? Is it one with its parts and so forth? So that, and then you have this remaining refutation in those last few verses that was presented. So that should be understood, this remaining, this extra refutation from what has been said above, the few verses we just went through, that should be understood. Rebut 2 others' response to our argument about whether a cause contacts its effects and so on. So we need to refute others' response, their argument. This is important to also understand how, well, our argument is not a rebounding argument as we're accused of, as the Prasangika are accused of. We need to understand why it isn't this kind of rebounding argument, that the same fault does not apply to the Prasangika view, and recognize also how ours is not an instance of flawed refutation, that the refutation we presented, well, it's not flawed. There's actually no flaw in it. You just need to understand that it accords with reality. In brief, understand all other refutations from what we've already outlined. So make an effort, go through the text, meditate on it, and understand all the different refutations and bring it all together in well, in your effort to reflect on it, and of course meditate and internalize everything that's been said. All right, and thus far to up to verse 178, we've covered this particular section, so important. One of the main topics of Chandrakirti's text comes at the end. Of course, makes sense, so important with regard to the self. And as I said last time, I want to summarize it, of course, but first wanted to finish this. All right, so we'll have time for a little meditation. Hard to decide what we're going to do, so I'll try and just bring in some of the things we discussed today. And like I said, for next time, we'll discuss starting with verse 120 of the 6th chapter. So if you want to be better prepared, just read through the verses again, just to remind yourself. And in that way, the summary may be more effective. All right. So let's do some meditation. Starting again, just with some breathing. And also letting go of any disruptive thoughts, confused thoughts. So now, having studied the 6th chapter quite extensively, you've come to understand that all phenomena lack inherent existence. And nothing exists in and of itself, despite appearing that way. But if the mind labels phenomena, what is that process of imputing or labeling? Well, it's our conceptual mind that is always present. That engages in the process of labeling. based, of course, on a valid basis of imputation or valid basis of labeling. Based on particular body, in particular mental events or minds, we label I. And thereafter, mine, my body, my mind. My family, my house, and so forth. Without this process of labeling, there wouldn't be an I. There wouldn't be a body or a mind. And there wouldn't be mine. So these are all merely labeled, just imputed by thought. So the things around us that seem so concrete, so solid, they're like an illusion. But they don't exist in that way at all. As reasoning can prove. Therefore, the refutation the reasoning presented by Chandrakirti, whether cause and effect meet or not. It's only effective if there's an assertion of inherent existence. That same reasoning is in no way effective in refuting that phenomena are merely labeled. For the more we think about it, the clearer it becomes that they are. And that inherent existence is simply impossible. And this is particularly relevant when it comes to understanding the I. For not understanding this properly is the cause for all our problems. If the I is merely labeled, cannot be found among body and mind, what is it that is seen as the center of the universe? And that is the object of self-centeredness. That exaggerated sense of an I simply doesn't exist. the object of self-centeredness, an inherent I. Is a fictitious, it's a fiction created by the mind. Giving us the freedom to dedicate ourselves to others without constantly having to worry about I and mine. And now to conclude this analysis, single-pointedly focus on whatever insight you've gained and allow for it to sink deeper into your mind, allow for it to be deeper internalized. And now to dedicate all the positive potential we've created together. May it become a cause for us to eventually attain the enlightened state of a Buddha, so that we become most effective to work for the benefit of all sentient beings. Once we reach that state, and in the meantime, may it cause our great lamas, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and all the other great masters of the Nalanda tradition, to be healthy and continue to turn the wheel of Dharma for a long time to come. But may the virtue we've accumulated also be effective to help the people around us. Help those who are sick, like Tali Lubin, to get better soon. Those who worry, to find peace of mind. And of course, as described by Shantideva in his prayer, may all beings everywhere plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain the notion of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, thank you very much. And just a reminder, as an offering to His Holiness for the upcoming teachings, very auspicious His Holiness teaching on the Pali Sutra, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. As an offering, therefore, to His Holiness, let's make an extra effort to practice bodhicitta. Maybe if we can, in combination, Sabha Yoga bodhicitta with the mind of enlightenment, the way His Holiness has instructed us. But making an extra effort also when it comes to exchanging ourselves with others, the way discussed in the beginning. So in our interaction with other people, and also, of course, in our meditation. And in that way, prepare ourselves for the upcoming teachings. All right, have a great week. And then I see you again next Sunday. And if you have the time, please start reading from verse 120 as part of the summary we're going to do. Okay. Good night, Laila Tov.
Good night. Thank you, Geshe-ma.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Geshe-ma. Good night, everyone.